Hello and welcome to the first in QCOS's tender writing series for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, or SKU. SKU is funded by the Queensland Government, the Department of Trade, Employment and Training, and they've also funded this series. Before we begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land I'm coming to you from in Meanjin, Brisbane, that is the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. QCOS also thanks the First Nations people for the gift of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We're committed to working alongside First Nations people and working towards representation, Makarrata and treaty. Today we're going to be doing an introduction to tender writing and grant writing. This is focused on SKU in particular, but you'll find that most of the principles and strategies are really relevant across the range of grants and tenders that you might apply for. So first we'll have a bit of a look at tender writing in general, then we're going to look at the assessor priorities for SKU in particular before we go through some steps to help you prepare to write your tender or grant application. One of the really important things about any tender or grant application is to understand what the funders and the assessors of your application are looking for. And it's really common across all grants and tenders, particularly in the community sector, that you need to show what you can do and what your organisation has done previously, that you understand the specific program that you're applying for funding under and its purposes, and that you can show an alignment of those purposes with your organisation and its capabilities. Where you can back these things up with specific evidence or examples, that's always going to strengthen your application. So you'll see as we go through these tender writing webinars and workshops that all of the things that we're doing are coming back to these core processes for application writing. Before we go any further, we're going to have a think about what we need to put into an application and the processes and planning that need to go into it ahead of time. And we don't actually start writing the tender or grant application itself until quite late in the process. And that might seem a bit surprising, but it actually makes perfect sense when you realise that a lot of grant writing efforts go to waste. So a majority of people who've started writing grants or tenders have at least one that they haven't finished, and there are really common reasons for that. A few years ago, Mission Australia did research into grant writing, and they found that among the people who had started and then not finished an application, a lot of them simply ran out of time. They hadn't done the planning or the timeline processes that were needed to make sure they actually had sufficient time to get everything together that they needed to. And another good chunk, around about 40% in total, found throughout the process that either the program that they were applying for wasn't suitable for the project that they wanted to run, or that they weren't actually eligible for it at all. So the majority of reasons that people might start an application and then not finish it, and also reasons that they may end up with a weaker application that isn't successful, are because there isn't enough of that planning and preparation time. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. There were some good news stories from Mission Australia's report as well, and this may be reassuring for you, especially if you've applied for a grant or tender before and not been successful, because what their research found is that more experienced grant writers do become more successful. So if you keep trying, chances are you're going to learn from the things that didn't work previously and start succeeding more with your grants or applications as you go along. And in fact, people who are doing grant writing as part of a bigger role, which most of us in the community sector who do any grant writing are, actually can be just as successful as people who write grants and applications professionally. They don't actually have any higher level for those professional grant writers than the rest of us. So with that said, let's have a look at what the priority areas are for the assessors and the funding body for SKU in particular. And if you go back to that orientation, those common needs that we talked about earlier, it's going to be all about showing your understanding of the program and its purposes, and then the alignment of that with your organisation and your project idea. So SKU is a program that is aimed at supporting disadvantaged Queenslanders into work, and it wants to have not only those individual benefits for people who move into work where they've been, say, long-term unemployed, or perhaps their industry is reducing and they need to reskill, but also for benefits for the community in general and local economies, and that's what makes SKU a bit different to general job training or preparation programs. That said, there's a lot of information that we cover in our Introduction to SKU webinar, so if you haven't already watched that, I suggest that you take a break and do it. That will help you get your head around what SKU involves and what the priorities for the assessors are going to be. SKU applications are assessed by the Department of Trade, Employment and Training and SKU assessment committees, and they're looking for community organisations who are going to drive projects that have benefits for both individuals and communities. What that looks like in a bit more detail is evidence that you can recruit participants from those target or disadvantaged job seeker groups that SKU aims to assist, that you've got the skills and experience within your organisation to provide the kind of assistance that will legitimately break down some of those barriers to employment that people have experienced and help them move into work and maintain work, and that you have the relationships with employers and industries within your community to create real job opportunities when your participants wrap up their programs. So the department is also looking for evidence that you've got really strong partnerships, and partnerships are not only important in SKU applications, they're becoming really important in grant and tender applications across the board. Probably the most important partnership for many SKU programs is with a registered training organisation, or RTO, which is the organisation that's responsible for delivering the accredited training and assessment that is core to so many SKU projects. The department also wants to see that you've got connections with other community organisations, and this is both organisations who may refer people into your SKU project, but also those organisations that might provide support to your participants that you're not providing directly yourself. So as an example, if you have a SKU project that is aimed at working with young people, you might partner with a family support organisation that will provide some family counselling or some group programs for your young people as you roll out your SKU project. The other really important type of partnership for SKU programs is partnerships with employers or industry members in your local area. So this is about opening up those opportunities for jobs once participants complete your program, and it might be small businesses or really large employment providers in your area. The important thing is that you can show that you have established relationships with providers who support the project and who will commit to some manner of possibility or opportunity for your participants, whether that's providing some industry exposure and work experience, or confirming that they would consider interviewing one of your participants if a job opening came up after the project. So now we've got a bit of an overview of what SKU is and what the assessors are looking for. Let's have a look at preparing for writing your tender itself. Now you will have a copy of our Grant on a Page resource, and I encourage you to have that open in front of you as we talk through the next little bit, because this is where we encourage you to start mapping out these ideas. And we sort of have two clusters within the preparation process, and a lot of it depends on having the ideas and information that you need at your fingertips. So as we walk through at the remainder of this session, you'll get a lot of ideas for things that you need to gather or people you need to talk to, and we really encourage you to make note of those things on that resource as we go. First though, I'll introduce the idea of the grants reference library, and this is a central point of truth, if you like, for everyone who's involved in writing the grant within your organisation. And we actually encourage you to set this up not for SKU specifically, but for all grants in general, because most grants will require similar sorts of documentation. We really encourage you to Start putting together these documents now, and we're talking all sorts of really key bits of information. So things like your banking details, the legal information about your organisation, like its ABN and its charitable status or ORIC registration, for example. We also want to see a couple of years of audited financial statements, some descriptions of the projects and programs you've run previously and their outcomes, internal reports, and all of those sorts of things. And what you'll find as we go through is that there are all sorts of bits of information that are held by different people within your organisation, and if you're going to each of those people individually just when you realise you need the document, that can take a really long time. But if you've got them all in one central location before you start, it's going to make the process much easier. I will remind you here as well, and you'll probably get sick of my saying this by the end of the tender writing series, but please take the time at this point to review the requirements of the grant, double check that you're eligible, and if you're working with other people, say in your organisation or your partner organisation, get them to have a look at it too and have a bit of a chat. Remember that in that Mission Australia report, a whole lot of people found partway through the application process that the grant they were applying for wasn't actually suitable. If you put in the time to check that now, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and trouble further down the track if you find out you're not eligible. There are a lot of documents that the department makes available for SKU. You can download a provider pack which has a lot of these in it, and just make sure you're working through the funding guidelines, the FAQs, the fact sheets, all of those sorts of things. You can find a sample services agreement which gives you a sense of what your responsibilities will be if you are successful, and you can also register for the application portal and start getting a sense of what that looks like ahead of time. Now on to the details on our grant on a page sheet. So we've got two sort of chunks here. One set that's all about the initial ideas, and then a little bit later on about developing your plan. So when it comes to your initial ideas, we're talking very early days, not detailed or anything like that, but starting to just think about who are the participants going to be? You know, who are you targeting here? Are they one of those groups that SKU funding is intended to assist? And think here too about who your organisation has experience working with, because the department really wants to see that you do have the experience and the expertise with the target group. And that can help them be assured that you are in a position to provide the right kinds of support. Think about what you want to achieve, the impact that you want to have. Think too about the value add, and that's a bit of corporate speak, which we don't necessarily appreciate in the sector, but it comes to a really important point, which is that the funders want to see what it is that stands your application out compared to others. So what is the unique set of knowledge or skills or proven track record that your organisation has that means you should be getting this funding? And finally, think about the resources that you'll need to roll out the project if you do get the funding. And resources that often come to mind are sort of physical resources and assets, but think as well about staffing, about the financial resources, your IT, your utilities, all of those sorts of things. Now, once you've got this first sort of chunk of ideas there, it's time to pause and then go back to those requirements again and start checking things. Does your core organisational purpose and your activities match up well with the purposes of SKU? Do you have that experience with a community or cohort that's among SKU program targets? Do you really fully understand what your responsibilities will be if you get the funding? Do you have the relationships in place that you need? And can you appoint staff or recruit them quickly if you do get the funding? Now, if you can check off all of those boxes, you're ready to start developing your plan. And this is where the second half of the grant on a page comes in. So this is where you start mapping out who those core partners will be. This will be organisations in the community sector, the registered training organisation, and the employers that we mentioned earlier. Then your project team, so who within your organisation will be involved both in writing the tender itself but also in rolling out the SKU project if you're successful in getting the funding. the activities that your participants will undertake in the project. So this is the learning and assessment activities, but also the wraparound supports and other forms of learning that are the core of your SKU project. And finally, how you'll evaluate the project to see whether it's actually achieving its aims once you get to the end. Now, once you've got a sense of how things are looking, you've got that summary view that the grant on a page provides, the next thing to do is get your whole project team together for a kick-off meeting for the grant writing itself. So kick-off meeting is a really great way to start a project, get everyone on the same page. You can together review what the requirements are and what you need to get done in order to get the application in. At the kick-off meeting, have a really detailed discussion of what tasks need to be undertaken in order to get the application in, when they need to be done by, and who'll be responsible for each part. And it's a good idea here to use a central document or project management software that everyone on the team has access to, so that you can really clearly see what's due when and who is responsible for it. And that can help prevent all sorts of hiccups where people forget or misunderstand what their responsibilities are and those sorts of things. And we suggest, when you're thinking about putting due dates on things, that you work back from the ultimate due date, which is the date that your application has to be submitted, and then think about, for each preceding task, how many hours or days it's reasonable to allocate to that, and then build in some buffer time as well if you can. And what you'll see if you do that is that it's a really good idea to get this process started now, rather than waiting until the SKU window opens, when you just simply won't have enough time to get everything done as well as you want to. Now, finally, as we wrap up for today, I wanted to share some resources with you that we think will help you, both for your own purposes, but also to share with your partners to get everyone on the same page. QCOSS has a whole lot of short videos on SKU and tender writing for SKU on our website. You will be able to just click on the links in the PowerPoint slides that we will be sending out. And we also have some written resources that you might find really useful. So the grant on a page template, which I've already mentioned, but also a more comprehensive project planning template and guide. Department of Trade, Employment and Training also has some resources that you'll find really useful, including the provider kit and the info for community services. That's it for me today. I really look forward to seeing you in our next session.